Okay, I think we'll start, ladies. We'll start on time today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Our talk today is on dementia. We will be looking at the science of dementia, which is definitely something which is lacking in the talks that I've been going to. They cover all the symptoms and what happens and what we can do about it, but they never look at what actually causes it. How does it happen? What is the science that goes on in the brain? And I find that bit really interesting, because then you can understand what will work and what won't. So the science of dementia, a lot of people don't know that I used to be a scientist in my younger days. So I used to actually work in Moorfields Eye Hospital, and the degree that I've done is actually biomedical studies nowadays, it's called. It was biotechnology in the days I did it, but that same degree has now been renamed biomedical studies, so it's quite relevant to this. And I've also got a master's in special needs and disabilities, so that actually does cover a lot of things like this as well, like dementia. We will be looking at the causes, we will be looking at the culture as well, the culture of Asian, black, minority ethnic communities in terms of dementia. What do they feel about it? Because there is a big stigma, and we will talk about all of that as well, and how we can make that better. And also, are there any cures for dementia? So we will look at that as well. I have been on dementia training in my workplace, which is why I'm doing this. And I've also been on proper intensive training, which was a 2-day course, which Shaima ran, didn't she? And she actually, the training we had was so that we can go out into the community and train others on dementia. So I'm fully qualified to do this. And Women Together, a lot of people don't know, is part of an umbrella voluntary organisation called Essex Mind and Spirit. Essex Mind and Spirit is an organisation which deals with how faith helps with mental health. So it could be anything from meditation to fasting to prayer and things like that. And that organisation has got 5 clusters around Essex, and the cluster here in South Essex is the one that I run. But there's one in Colchester, there's a couple of other...
Epping.
Yes, one in Epping, one in... there was one in Southend, wasn't there?
Chelmsford.
Okay, yes, Chelmsford is the other one, that's right. And what happened was we had a very big conference for dementia a couple of years ago. And what happened was we actually got funding. We actually got £10,000, didn't we, through the big lottery, to do a big conference on dementia. And then what happened was we didn't use all of that money. And then what happened was everyone then, all the clusters got £100 to do some training on dementia. So £100 we've got today. I'm free, I'm a free speaker, and the room is free. So we thought we'd use the £100 on food today instead, so that's what we're going to do. Audrey was the treasurer of Essex Mind and Spirit, and she did a fantastic job. So I want to thank you today in front of everybody, really, for all the work that you've done for Essex Mind and Spirit. So I've got some flowers here for you.
Oh, no.
So if we can give her a big clap. This is why we needed that big thing.
I'm blown away. I have a passion for what I do, so...
Yes,
Thank
but
you
it's
very
always
much.
nice to be recognised, isn't it?
I didn't want to give up.
So there's your lovely
My mum
flowers.
has dementia, and I've tried to carry on
And there's your card.
and do everything, but some things had to give, as most people understand.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
that's okay, that's
Oh,
fine.
bless you. Oh.
Okay, so let's carry on then. So let us start. So what is dementia? Basically, dementia is actually a generic term, and it's a disease marked by a gradual loss of cognitive functioning with loss of motor, emotional and social function. Okay? All of this will make sense in a minute when we go into the science of things. And it's actually permanent. It is permanent, although there are some strategies that we can use to help relieve some of the things that are exhibited by dementia. It's permanent and a progressive disease that eventually renders people unable to care for themselves. It's quite sad, really, actually, when you go through this, as, you know, it's quite sad the way a person does deteriorate as they go along. There are 4 major parts of the brain, okay? There's the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Those are the 4 regions of the brain which are affected when you have dementia. And each of those 4 parts of the brain, they have a specific role. And what happens is, nerves die as you get older, or for other reasons, which we will look at all of those. And depending on which part of the brain the nerves die in, it's that then, the functions that you will lose. Does that make sense? Okay? So now let us look at each part of the brain, each of those 4 lobes, what their actual function is first. So the frontal lobe we'll start off with first. That controls all the responses to input from the rest of the central nervous system. So that is actually a very major role. Controls all the responses. So response to heat and touch. That's why that slows down, doesn't it, with people with dementia? They can't pull away so quickly when they maybe touch a hot cook or something. Voluntary movement, okay, is all linked with the frontal lobe. Emotion. Okay, now some of you will know the frontal lobe is linked with autism. Some of you have come to my special needs talks. And some of these things, autistics exhibit as well, because their frontal lobe, the connections are missing as well in them. Okay? Planning as well. Organising, so organisation goes if parts of the nerves in that frontal lobe die. Intellect. Memory, which is a very big one. This is actually one of the first signs of dementia, is where you lose your memory. And speech and language as well. And writing and learning tasks. So somebody with dementia cannot learn new tasks if the nerves have gone in that part of the frontal lobe of their brain. And regulating behaviour as well. And your personality. That's quite sad, really, because personality sort of doesn't stay the same once you get dementia. You have like almost like a personality disorder. You change, completely change. And initiating stopping actions. Again, things like autistics may have delayed reaction sometimes to things, or they overreact. It's because there are nerves missing in their frontal lobe, which means that, you know, your circuit, if you think of like an electric circuit, and it goes around smoothly around your whole brain, when there's nerves missing in your brain, the electric circuit isn't smooth, it stops and then it starts. And that is what exhibits all of these kinds of things. Does that make sense? Pardon? The nerves die as you get older, and with other things which we will look at causes in a minute, like drugs, drinking, food, some of the food we're eating as well, that kind of stuff. And then let's have now a look at the parietal lobe. That is the part that interprets sensations of tactile stimulation, like pain, temperature, touch, size, shape, and body part awareness. We all know, for example, that the elderly, they may have the central heating on really a lot, and they don't feel the heat. And we go in their house and it's really hot. With my mum and dad's house, it's freezing cold, and they don't feel it. They don't feel the heat, the cold anymore. And then, you know, in the winter, there's been so many reports on the news that poor old people have passed away because They couldn't feel that it was cold and their body temperature went down and then they passed away. So this is why that happens. This is why I said it's important to understand the science. They're remembering the sequence of actions. They may not be organised as they were before. Calculations, sentence construction, problems interpreting visual information, like not recognising people. My grandmother had this and it was very, very painful. She didn't recognise her own daughter anymore. But she recognised me, which is so strange, because I'm the granddaughter. So she remembered me, but she didn't recognise her own daughter anymore, which was my mum, which was very, very hard for my mum, very hard for my mum. And locating objects, can't remember where everything is, memory. Some of us are getting there quicker than we've got there.
Sidra, can I just add something about
yes, of course you can, yes.
the visual?
Yes.
And I listened to Mark at his talk in Epping and it made sense.
Yes.
The way my mum has her kitchen organised now, it's as if she's gone back in time. And it was only listening to Mark's talk that I realised that in her eyes, she only sees a couple of cupboards. The others have disappeared. It's like she's gone back in time to when there were only a couple of cupboards where everything was stored.
Yes.
And so she's got everything in these two cupboards.
Yes,
And
yes. Now that's very interesting. There's two reasons for that. One, she is going back to the time that she remembers, and she's forgotten the new cupboards that have gone in. But shall I tell you something else really interesting? You know, men have tunnel vision. They only see in front of them. And women, they have peripheral vision. Okay, so the other one is peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is where you can see everything around you, around yourself. For the children, did you know we have peripheral vision for a reason, so that we can see around us and keep an eye on all our children. And you know when the nerves get lost, do you know what we end up getting? Tunnel vision. We end up getting tunnel vision. So, you know, like men, they look in a cupboard and they can only see what's in front of them. They can never find anything you give to them because they can only see what's in front and not around it. That is what happens to women when they're older. Isn't that interesting? I find that absolutely amazing. So that is what happens. Right, let's just carry on to the temporal lobe now. Understanding sounds. Remember, at this stage, their hearing might have gone as well. So, I mean, with my mum, she's definitely getting all of this, because I can just see it all coming, and she can't hear us half the time, and there's certain sounds she hears, and they're not those sounds. And certain sounds, for some reason, are really harsh, you know, like an autistic again. Certain sounds are so strong, and I can't take it. And with my mum, it's the clock in the sitting room. She goes, the tick-tock is really loud. So what's going on there is certain nerves are dying in your brain and certain nerves are not. So certain parts of your brain are getting more active so they can hear tiny, tiny sounds, like an autistic can't deal with certain sounds, like a hand dryer, yes? And then certain sounds they can't hear. So that's the very important way to try and understand it, compare it to an autistic child sometimes.
When I'm with my mum, she's got mixed Alzheimer's dementia.
Yes.
In, say, Asda, the humming of the fridge is
Yes.
really loud in her head.
Loud, yes.
Yeah. She goes,
Do
when
you
we get out
see?
the aisle, she's like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't even hear it.
And you can't even hear it because they're showing autistic tendencies.
Okay.
So
I'm
some of
working in a
their nerves
school.
are dying down and then they can't hear certain things, but other things are overstimulated. And this is what happens.
Excuse, sorry, I work in a school, and what
Yes.
you are saying now really
Yes.
makes sense.
Yes.
Because there's this child
Yes.
that can't stand it when they are in the hall together, because
Yes.
other children are talking.
Yes.
So
That's
now
right.
I really understand. So that's what is happening to him, and he always puts his hands in.
Hands in his ears, or they might wear ear muffs.
Yeah.
Hands together, pair of earmuffs.
Yes. But this is the reason, it is the same thing.
My child
It is
wears
the
an
same
earmuff.
thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, right, let's carry on. Understanding speech, because the processing isn't there, you see, because the nerves have died down, so the processing isn't there, the circuit is not complete, the circuit is staggered, so your processing might go a different way. Your circuit might take a different pathway, like you take an alternative route when you're going somewhere, and one route is closed, yeah? A motorway is shut, oh, we better take the back routes, yeah? You take the back routes, the diversion, and it takes longer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what you need to think about, okay? Emotion as well, like I said, if you look at an autistic child, their emotions, they might cry for no reason, and then other things, like a death may happen and they don't show any reaction. So that happens as well. Memory, we've already mentioned memory, that's a very big one because that is the first sign of dementia. One of the first things the doctors look for. Remembering recent events. Remember, long-term memory is stronger, the connections have been made stronger over the years. You've been remembering that event and those connections are stronger. But you know, your recent event memory goes faster because the connections are weaker and those nerves die quicker. So you remember things from way back, but not anything like what happened yesterday you don't remember, but then you remember all your childhood. And when it gets really bad, the poor, you know, some of the poor ladies, they may not remember they were even married, or may not remember their children, but they remember when they were children, you see. So it's very interesting and sad as well. I find this talk quite sad, yes. We've all got old parents and we're all, you know, seeing this actually, seeing all this happen. Learning new information, again, my dad, he still cannot answer a mobile phone. He's used to the home phone. He doesn't, honestly, we have told him again and again and again, Dad, it's the green button you press. It's got a Nokia brick phone. He can't do it. My mum was in hospital recently. There was no way of getting in touch with her dad when he's not at home. He cannot relearn new information because to learn new information, you need to make new connections. Yeah? But the new connection is not there. You can't make new connections, your old connections are dying off. Yes? And visual memory, faces, again this is to do with memory, so they may remember people who they know really, really well, but people who they might have just met a couple of days ago, they're not going to recognise them. Again, similar to autistics, think about it. They don't recognise faces, do they? That's one of the traits of an autistic child, isn't it? Again, the connections are missing in their frontal lobe, so that's why. Okay, verbal memory, including names, that all comes under memory really. And attention as well, they're not paying attention, they go in a daze. Again, autistics come to mind again. Especially as children, poor things are always in a daze, aren't they? They're not really with it, are they, a lot of the time? Unless it's something that interests them.
Well, again, it's interesting, because I was talking about this in work, because I work in mental health, although I'm not mental health qualified, you know, it's through experience. And we were saying that when somebody's had a mental health issue for so many years, what point is it like where it's actually part of their behaviour? And with my mum, she's been anxious all her life, well, not all her life. There was something that happened in her childhood that changed this bubbly, bright, confident child into a very anxious and shy child who'd been separated suddenly from her mum and dad. And that stayed with her when she was married to my dad. When I was young, I can always remember she didn't go to social events. She was too scared, she'd throw up, you know, she'd be sick if she went to a party, so therefore she didn't go to parties. She didn't have friends because it was all too much. And yet now, it's almost like she's forgotten how she was because she's very confident now. She does things that surprise me all the time.
Now that's interesting. Does that mean she's forgotten that little trauma that she had? Do you think that's what's happened? She's
still
forgotten.
Talks about that time,
She does.
but it's like the behaviour has changed, almost like she's forgotten to be anxious anymore.
Yes, and that's what brings me back to the point when I mentioned your personality changes. So her personality has changed.
Yes,
hasn't
it has.
Yeah. Because of all this brain all changed. Occipital lobe. Understanding visual images. Understanding the meaning of the written words. So this is all to do with visual. Process information about colour, shapes and movement. Okay. And that is basically all to do with the visual, I would say there. And again, if parts of the nerves die in that lobe, that's when you get things like tunnel vision, like I said, you end up, you know, like a male brain, tunnel vision, because you don't get all the peripheral visual nerves there anymore. Okay, so we've got a video now which will explain all of that, what I've just done.
What is dementia? Dementia is the name for a group of symptoms that commonly include problems with memory, thinking, problem solving, language, and perception. In a person with dementia, these symptoms are bad enough to affect daily life. Dementia is not a disease in its own right. Dementia is caused by a loss of nerve cells. It is a progressive condition, meaning that symptoms gradually get worse. This is because when a nerve cell dies, it cannot usually be replaced. As more and more cells die, the brain starts to shrink. This can sometimes be seen in a brain scan of someone with dementia. These scans show a slice through the middle of the brain from the front, like looking through the middle of a stick of rock. They show what happens to the brain of someone with Alzheimer's disease as their dementia progresses over several years. Note how the black areas become larger. This is because the brain tissue, the grey areas, continues to shrink or atrophy as nerve cells die off. Common symptoms of dementia include problems with day-to-day memory, concentrating, organising and planning, as well as difficulties with language and visual perception, and changes in mood. However, each person will experience dementia differently, and the symptoms depend on the areas of the brain that are affected. For example, if cells in the temporal lobes start to die, that person might have difficulties with their language. Nerve cell death in the occipital lobes can cause problems with vision.
Okay, does that make sense so far, what I've explained? Because it was a bit high-tech, but I think it's quite manageable, isn't it, the way I'm explaining it with the pictures and everything. So, did you know that there are two types of dementia? Now, so now it's going to get detailed, okay? And basically there's the cortical, which is the disorder affecting the cortex, which is the outer portion of layers of the brain. And then there is the subcortical, which is dysfunction in parts of the brain that are beneath the cortex, so it's more deep inside, okay? And it's actually the outer ones that exhibit more problems. So there is memory and language difficulties. It's called aphasia, most pronounced symptoms. And aphasia is the inability to recall words and understand common language. And then if we look at the subcortical kind, memory loss and language difficulties not present or less severe than cortical, so this is less severe. Huntington's disease and AIDS dementia complex come under all of this. And changes in their personality and attention span. And thinking slows down. So those are the two different kinds. But most people with dementia may exhibit both. So they may come under cortical and subcortical. Again, it all depends where your nerves go. Okay?
So it's true what they say, if you learn a language, a new language as you get older,
Yes.
it stops those cells dying out.
Yes, but did you know, as a special needs coordinator, you should learn a language before secondary school? This is why the government recognised this and introduced languages at the primary age a couple of years ago. Because did you know that when you're young, all your nerves are developing, all your pathways are developing, when you access all these lovely, brilliant things, including speech, language, everything, and that's when all the nerves form. And then later on, it does slow down, even with children. It does. So then it's more difficult to learn a new thing like a language, which is a difficult thing, at the secondary age. And now you can just forget it. I tried to learn Arabic language a couple of years ago and I'm still at it. So it's so difficult, isn't it? Whereas young children, they grasp it very quickly. You know.
Like sponges.
Yeah, a lot of children within our community are bilingual from a very young age, but that's because they were exposed to the two languages at an early age. Okay, now Alzheimer's, which we are going to talk about a lot, because that's the largest form of dementia. Alzheimer's is a form of cortical dementia, so the top one, which is the worst one, okay, out of the two. And then here is all the symptoms now when your nerves start dying. These are all the symptoms that you will see in someone who has got dementia. So it begins with forgetfulness. This is why I said that memory is the first trigger which doctors will look for. But that is not isolated incidents of memory loss. It's all the time. So that's what we need to look for, not isolated, like sometimes they might forget your name and the next minute, oh, hello, Nasreen. And then tomorrow, oh, what was your name again? It's all the time, like, I don't know what your name is. Yeah? So that is then dementia, coming up to dementia. Forgetfulness progresses to confusion and eventually disorientation. And then problem solving goes, your judgment goes, your decision making goes, orienting to space and time, that all goes, and personality changes, irritable, agitated, sadness, depression, manic episodes. Now I'll tell you why the depression kicks in, is as your nerve cell die, your circuit is not complete, okay? Which means that you know all those dopamine and serotonin and endorphins, all the happy hormones, they are not being mixed in your brain properly. Again, think of a circuit, yeah? So when there's a cut in that circuit, those chemicals are going to stop somewhere in your brain, aren't they? They're going to accumulate in certain parts of your brain and not be mixed in the whole of your brain. And this is then where the depression and the anxiety and all of that comes in. This is the same, by the way, as special needs. Exactly the same as poor special needs children. That's why they are more prone to depression, because of that. And then the progression of dementia, all types of dementia are progressive. I mentioned that right at the beginning. The structure and chemistry of the brain become increasingly damaged over time. The person's ability to remember, understand, communicate and reason gradually declines. Okay? And how quickly dementia progresses all depends on each individual. It depends on their body chemistry. It depends on their metabolism as well, believe it or not. Did you know if they've got a fast metabolism, it might make you go downhill quicker? You know, nerve cells are going to die quicker. Each person is unique and experiences dementia in their own way. And then in the later stages of dementia, during the later stages, most people will become increasingly frail, becoming totally dependent on others. And did you know that there are articles, journals, this is Brejusen H 2005, refers to a slide back to a child-baby state within dementia. However, always treat the person with dementia as an adult. Now, some of you Muslims, what does that remind you of? The life cycle, which is written in the Quran. It tells you in the Quran, I'm saying this for a big reason, because this is why when it comes to Muslims and dementia, they'll just say, well, it's a part of life. So it tells you in the Quran that you will eventually, in old age, end up like a child again. So you will need your food purified, your speech will not be the same like it was when you were a child, you will repeat yourself, you will forget, you will become weak, you will end up in a wheelchair, which is like a pram, which children were in a pram. Do you see the whole life cycle? Yet journals have proven that dementia ends up with that. So can you see that mother, who is actually supporting her daughter there, is end up becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, and in the end she's a child in the child's arms. The mother becomes a child in the child's arms. Okay, so that's what we mean by that. Okay, there are 5 types of common dementia. Okay, and the largest segment is actually Alzheimer's, which is here. Alzheimer's is on the whole where parts of your brain become damaged. And when we say that, we are talking about nerve cells dying and things like that. But we will go into detail with Alzheimer's in a minute. And then we've got LBD, which is Lewy body dementia. That actually shares characteristics with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases. And what happens there is protein deposits in the nerve cells. So we will talk about that again in detail in a minute. The other one is Parkinson disease, which is actually similar to Alzheimer's, except the motor control part goes more in your brain. So then that's where you get the shaking and everything. And then we've got FTD, frontotemporal dementia, damage to the frontal lobe and temporal parts of the brain, and that then affects the behavior, emotional responses, and language skills as well. So those are the top 4, and the 5th one is vascular dementia, where there are problems in supply of blood to the brain. Now, when there is someone who has a heart attack or stroke, lack of oxygen, lack of blood goes to the brain, and that kills off the nerve cells. So that is another very big one. So someone who's got respiratory problems when they're older are gaining less oxygen going in their brain, and then their nerve cells are dying quicker. So it is linked with oxygen intake as well, and things like that. Okay, and then with Alzheimer's disease, progressive disorder in which neurons deteriorate, resulting in loss of cognitive functions, mainly memory, but judgment and reasoning, movement coordination, and pattern recognition, and predominantly affects the cerebral cortex and hippocampus, which waste away as a result of the degeneration of cells. Okay, so here is our circuit, which is being cut. Can you see? So the circuit is not complete, so all the chemicals are not mixed properly in your brain because there's cuts, and then the nerve cells die, and it's a mixture of all of that, then that results in all those symptoms. So did you know that Alzheimer's is the commonest neurodegenerative and dementing disease? And did you know that its prevalence doubles every 5 years after the age of 65? So if anybody's after the age of 65, then its prevalence doubles every 5 years. And did you know that 50%, that becomes 50% if you're older than 85 years old? So a lot of people in the old people's homes are suffering from Alzheimer's. My husband tells me that because he does all his rounds in the old people's homes. Right, so let us look at the neuroanatomy now. Like I did say, this is a science lecture of Alzheimer's. So if we look at the hippocampus, it plays a crucial role in both the encoding and retrieval of information. Damage to the hippocampus produces global retrograde amnesia, which is when we, the forgetfulness, which is the inability to retain newly learned information. So everything basically to do with memory completely goes. And the other problem we get is we end up with neuritic plaques. So you know where the gaps are between the nerves. You know I explained about the circuit and the gaps? Things start getting deposited in between those nerves, like protein deposits. So neuritic plaques, commonly found in brains of elderly people, but appear in excessive numbers in the cortex of Alzheimer's disease patients. So surrounded by deteriorating neurons that produce acetylcholine. So new chemicals are then produced, and that's how we end up with more complex problems. So that's a healthy neuron, and that's a neurofibrillary tangle, which is twisted remains of a protein which is essential for maintaining proper cell structure. So these are now amyloid plaques that start appearing in the brain as well. So all of this can be seen in a scan, which then shows what kind of dementia the patient has got. So the symptoms, obviously there will be loss of memory, which we've mentioned already, aphasia, apraxia, decreased ability to perform physical tasks such as dressing, eating, delusions. I've seen that actually in some old people. Easily lost and confused. My dad's a bit like that at the moment. Do you know what? I think I'm going to need to take him for a diagnosis, because when I'm doing this, I can see all these traits in my dad. Inability to learn new tasks, that's definitely my dad. I explained about the mobile phone. Loss of judgment and reason. Again, they can't drive anymore. They end up getting in more accidents. Loss of inhibitions and belligerence, social withdrawal, visual hallucinations. Okay? And memory loss is likely to be very severe in the later stages of dementia. People may be unable to recognize those close to them or even their own reflection. That's very hard, isn't it? They find their way around familiar surroundings or identify everyday objects. They may, lose the way. They may not recognize where their house is anymore. However, they may occasionally experience sudden flashes of recognition. So all of a sudden, their brain might take a different pathway, and then they do remember certain things. So your mum might suddenly remember, oh yes, this cupboard's over there as well, one day, because her brain is trying to find a different route. Do you understand? To remember. And all of a sudden, her brain, the circuit might take a different route, and all of a sudden she might remember.
Yeah, we see that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. But also, she went to a shop where she tried on some new clothes.
Yes.
And I saw her wave to herself
in the mirror. Now that is amazing, because that is bringing me to this, where we said they don't recognise themselves anymore.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because she thought that was a different person. Yeah. That's amazing, really. They forget how to get dressed and the sequence of dressing, so they might start off maybe with their shoes, which is usually the last thing we put on. Be patient, allow extra time, do not introduce new things. Again, this is actually in our religion. It tells you in the Quran that when your parents get old, be patient with them. It tells you again and again, be patient with them, like they were patient with you when you were children. Clean down nappies, they were with us when we were ill, they were patient. We have to do the same to them when they're older. Okay? Right, I am now going to give you an exercise which will help you understand how these poor people feel who have got dementia and forget things. So I'm going to ask you to get out a piece of paper and draw a penny on it, the back of a penny. Not the queen on it, the other side of the penny. The back of the penny, yes. Everybody has to do their own. This is another thing, you're on your own with your memory. So you're not allowed to tell anybody else or discuss, please. Okay? And not the queen's head, the other end of the penny. This is something that we see every single day. And let's see, do we remember it? And I want you to try and put as much detail on there as possible. See? That's dementia. how a dementia patient would feel. Now remember, we see pennies all the time, don't we? We see pennies all the time, so we should be able to know how to draw them.
5p, 10p, 25p?
No, only one pence and that's it. Only one pence. And try to put as much detail on there as possible, please. Right, are we ready then, everyone? Okay, who can tell me then, what does it look like? Can you describe it to me? Round. Yes, okay. From that, what picture's on there?
Round is brown. That's what I do.
A lion.
I've got lines.
Like a grid.
Yeah.
Good, yes. Anything else?
Mine looks like a thistle, head of a thistle plant.
Okay.
Does it say 1 penny at the top?
I think that's pretty.
And it says 1 penny. Good, good. It does say 1 penny. What else?
The date? No.
The date? Let's have a look.
Is brown.
It's 1 penny on the top, 1 at the bottom, and that is actually a crown. Who got the crown? Nobody got the crown. So there's actually a crown, and there's 2 chains, and that looks a bit like the London Dungeon sort of bit, doesn't it, Gates? Okay, so this is an idea of how a person with dementia would feel, something they see every day, maybe a couple of times a day in their purse. Think about how many times we take out our purse. Well, I take mine out at least twice a day. We look at it all the time, and we always have pennies, don't we, in our purses, yet we don't know what it looks like. And we're trying to remember, we're frustrated because we don't know what it looks like. But we know we do, but we can't remember. So basically, you know, it's just an exercise which I did at my training course to show what a dementia would feel like. They know, but they can't do it because the connections are just not there.
When my mum had a test, they made her draw a cube.
Yes.
I can't even do that sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard. And when she done the clock, the
Yes.
circle was immaculate, and she wrote it 12, 11, 10 in reverse. All the way
Yes. Yes. Again, what just comes into mind? They're dyslexics, doesn't it?
down.
Yeah? You know what? If you can understand special educational needs in children, you can understand dementia really, really well.
I think what you're saying is right. The tests have got to be appropriate. I mean, for instance, I don't look at pennies, and I've drawn Britannia, and you just said that's the very, very old penny. I pay for everything on a card, and I don't.
So you remember the old one, but not the new
But
one.
they often ask you things, don't they, about dates and stuff.
Yeah.
And people that are retired don't always have a newspaper. You know, they don't particularly take many do not take an interest in sort of what's going on. So I think the questioning has to be sort of appropriate.
It is, and you know the cube, you know we were looking at 3D and cognitive and all of that, that's why they told you to draw a cube, not just a square, because it's, they're looking, are the connections there where you can see the back of things and the side of things, 3D kind of structure. And the clock is a very interesting one, because when your connections go missing, you do things backwards. And this is a dyslexic trait that your mum showed, exactly that. Right, so let us now look at some more things that happen when you get dementia. The person may live in a time from their past, a bit like what you said about your mum, and may search for someone or something from that time. That's hard, you know, they might be looking for a friend, an old friend. Even if a person has severe memory loss, they may still be able to appreciate or respond to outside stimuli such as music, scent and touch. When we look at cures, that is something I'm going to go to in a minute, about something that helps them connect with their past. There are 4 common areas in which people with memory loss often experience difficulty. So this stuff we have sort of gone over a little bit, but we're looking at in detail now. So remembering recent events. Again, the recent events, the connections are weak, whereas old events, those connections are much more stronger because they've really gone over those old events. So they're going to remember their olden days more, even with us. I can remember things that happened years ago, but something that happened yesterday we forget, don't we? Even with us, it's exactly the same. For an older person, it's much more prominent. Taking in new information, we already explained that. Mobile phones, IT, you can forget it with poor, people with dementia, it's difficult. Remembering people separating fact from fiction. Now, what does that remind you of? An autistic child. They get things wrong, don't they? I thought that happened, but actually, no, that was a dream. So this is all to do with your brain, where certain things happen. No, it didn't, Mum. It didn't happen. Yes, it did. They get more stubborn.
Don't argue anymore.
Yeah, they get more stubborn and very set in their ways. Why? Because their pathways only go one way. They can't think outside the box anymore. The connections are not there. So think of a motorway. They only look down that motorway. They can't take the back routes. Okay? They will only have a one-set mind, only going one way. You can tell them what you like till you're blue in the face, and they'll tell you the same again. Because they can't think outside the box anymore. Okay, communication problems, understanding what is being said, when you have to repeat yourself, because their processing is slower, and what is going on around them. Difficult to communicate with other people. They can only communicate with their own family, for example. Again, we're looking at autism here. Autistics communicate best with people who they know the best. Yes, and then they've got withdrawn with other people. They may gradually lose their speech, or they may repeat a few words or cry out from time to time. Repetition is definitely there, isn't it, with dementia, where they will repeat again and again. They've forgotten what they've said. The person's expression and body language may give clues about how they are feeling. Again, look at special needs children. How do we know how they are feeling? We look at their body language, don't we? They can't always verbalize what they are feeling. They'll show it in their body movements. So that is something to look out for. And those around the person should continue talking to them as though they understand. This helps to preserve their dignity. There may still be moments when the person seems to make an appropriate response. So you still have to try and be patient and talk to them like they are adults, without making them feel silly. Loss of mobility. Many people with dementia gradually lose their ability to walk and to perform everyday tasks unaided. One of the first signs of this is that they shuffle or walk unsteadily, so suddenly they'll be out of balance. They may also seem slow or clumsy and be more likely to bump into things, drop objects, or fall. Some people with dementia eventually become confined to a bed or chair. And we did actually talk about wheelchairs earlier on, didn't we? I don't know if I missed out something there. Nothing said. Okay, most people with dementia lose weight in the later stages of the illness. They need help and encouragement with eating and drinking. And because their muscles become weak, their chewing and swallowing are a problem. So my father-in-law, he had a stroke that killed off a lot of nerves, and all of a sudden he couldn't swallow anymore. So he had to have a tube fitted through his stomach, and the food would go in liquidly, in a liquid format through his stomach. Because the connections go, and suddenly they can't swallow anymore. The brain connection has gone from the brain to the mouth. So they may choke, their reflexes go and they may choke, and they do develop chest infections. The food goes down the wrong way. My mother-in-law was a classic one. She was always in hospital for chest infections and then died of one in the end. So I can see some of these traits in her as well. Sometimes a speech therapist can correct that, A lot of the time, once your speech goes, it's difficult. But it's like a stroke patient. You know, when a stroke patient loses their speech, and through specific types of speech therapy and physiotherapists, they may get their speech back, or it may come back a little bit, but not perfectly. That can work with dementia patients. A nutritional specialist can be used for advice on special diets. You may become more allergic to things as you get older. You may get more allergic to certain foods where you can't eat certain foods anymore. But purifying is a real classic one. I mean, they certainly want their food softened. They can't eat hard things anymore. Incontinence is another big one. Many people lose control of their bladder and bowels in the later stages of dementia. And that's very common, very, very common. The NHS are absolutely brilliant nowadays. They give out incontinence pads and nappies and things like that, you know, to help. There's a lot of support out there anyway. In fact, did you know that 80% of the NHS money goes on the elderly nowadays? Because of people are living longer, a lot longer than they were, and a lot of the support is needed for them. And then puzzling behaviours. They become more agitated, react aggressively if they feel threatened or cannot understand what is going on around them, may rock backwards and forwards. What does that remind you of?
Autism.
Autism. And I'm looking at you because I know you support an autistic child, so you will see some of these traits there. Repetitive movements, keep calling out the same sound or word. That is definitely autistic behaviour. Experience hallucinations in which they see, smell, hear, taste or feel things that are not really there. They develop delusions in which they experience distorted ideas about what is happening. And then they become restless because they need more physical activity, but they can't get up and run around, so they feel more restless. They have excessive hand activity, constantly wringing their hands, pulling at their clothes, tapping or fidgeting. Again, autism comes into mind here. Have periods of physical inactivity during which the person remains still with their eyes open but not focused on anything. Again, you know, like the daydreaming kind of mode where you're talking to them and they're not saying anything and they're just still and just staring into space. That is very prominent as well. So, this is all the cognitive decline. This is my chart. And also some of the things which actually make dementia worse, so drug-induced stuff will also contribute to cognitive decline, alcohol and things like that, and medicines. Even food nowadays. We talked a little bit about food at the stress and anxiety talk. Depression as well, it's all part of that. Delirium. We've talked already about the 4 big dementias, but also other things. Did you know, like HIV, syphilis, trauma, any tumours? Say you've had cancer and you have chemotherapy. Do you know that kills off a lot of things, doesn't it, in your body? And you can then end up with dementia type problems because a lot of your cells in your brain, they die through chemotherapy. Something like HIV, you know, something huge like that, all the drugs is bound to have an effect on your brain. And other diseases, we've got hepatic, renal or thyroid disease, deficiency, toxins, all that kind of stuff can all contribute towards dementia, which is why children as young as 27, in my university there is somebody who's 27 years old who's got dementia. The other problem with the youngsters is they're not developing the connections in the first place. The social connections in their brain are not connecting because they're on their mobile phones. Yeah, they're on their iPads, they're on their computers. Mums are not talking to children anymore, they're too busy. So the speech connections are going, so the children are already at a young age not have got those connections formed. Do you see? So when they get to puberty age, when their hormones are all over the place, they are going to exhibit dementia type symptoms. Do you understand? So it is all linked with the science. And special needs children.
This is why so many teenagers are having depression.
Yes, so many, because the connections are not there. There's gaps in this circuit. The chemicals are accumulating in certain parts of their brain and not in others. So you end up with highs and you end up with lows with your mood.
And they got very low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem. It's all part of the chemicals in your brain, but also failing as well because of their special need. It is all very, very linked with the science of things. If you look at the science, it helps you to understand everything. Okay, so risk factors now. Now, did you know there is a genetic pattern? There is. So if parents have got Alzheimer's, for example, the likelihood, the probability of you getting it will be there, definitely. So it is genetic as well, because the layout of all their neurons and body chemistry will be the same as you. It's all genetic, isn't it? Okay, so I did cover genetics in great depth in my degree, and it is a lot of things we do know are genetic. And actually it says 10% of cases are genetic for Alzheimer's. Down syndrome. If you've got Down syndrome, remember you've already got so many connections missing in your brain, haven't you? Yeah, because we had Down syndrome in our school, and she couldn't write, she had speech problems, she had coordination problems. It was an all-rounder. They're already missing, so obviously later on, dementia is going to come to that person. Chronic hypertension, treatment reduces the risk. This is all to do with nerves, hypertension in the nerves. It's going to make them die quicker, isn't it? Head injuries. Now, I do know another child. Remember, I was a special needs coordinator. There was a child, and he was actually, did have a very big head injury. And half of his brain, there was actually clamps in there, clamps in his brain. And where the clamps were, the nerves were missing. So he was actually exhibiting coordination problems, visual problems, everything, dyslexic problems. So again, anybody who's got a head injury when they're children, the nerves are already missing from your brain, so when you're older, you're going to exhibit dementia-type traits. Age, we've already mentioned about age, because there is a general decrease in your nerves in your brain as you get older, they die down. Mild cognitive impairment, that is actually to do with a chemical in your brain. Vascular risk, diabetes, heart disease. Heart disease is a big one, because when you've got heart problems, the circulation in your blood system isn't there. So you know blood, it carries oxygen to your brain. And if your blood circulatory system is not very good, you're not getting enough oxygen in your brain, and then what's happening? The nerves are dying down. Does that make sense? And because of that, then it's having an impact and can contribute towards dementia. Low education and physical social activity. Now that's the one where the children are being targeted here. When we say low education, we're not talking about children who are in low education areas. We're looking at children who have got everything around them, learning, books, but they're not using them. They are using mobile phones, they're writing notes on mobile phones. Did you know that there is so much connections that are made when you write things down yourself in note format? I tell my students this again and again and again. When you revise, write it down, because there's a certain process from here to the paper, to the hand, to the paper, a connection forms which helps you to remember. Well, what are children doing nowadays? Oh, straight into the mobile phone, diary events. Do you know, when I write my diary events down into your lovely diary that you gave me, I remember everything, okay? When you put it in your phone, do you remember? Unless you get a reminder. It's not the same, is it? Okay? So there is certain connections formed in reading a book, not an e-book, a book in your hand, where you are reading the words, okay? An e-book is not going to help you read, and the imagination isn't there. With e-books, the pictures are all there. With a book in your hand, a novel, you imagine it all yourself. Think of Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Who read that as a child? Amazing book, no pictures. I imagined my own world of Narnia. And then when the film came out, I thought, oh, that's not how I imagined it to be. I imagined it to be this, and it was this. Do you see? The imagination isn't there with the children anymore. I'm glad your children are here. It's you I'm talking to, okay?
They're laughing.
They're laughing, are they? Because... Pardon?
It's like something, you call it, we're more into films than books nowadays.
Yes. It's easier to watch a film. You know, when my son was doing GCSE and he had a novel he had to read, I remember reading that as a child, and he took a big shortcut because there was lack of time. He said, oh, let's just put the film on. I put the film on, we watched it very quickly, but did it have an impact? No. Not the same impact as reading a book chapter by chapter, enthusiasm. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. You don't get that by watching a film because it's over within like 2 hours, isn't it?
And the smell of books.
The smell of books. You look at all those connections. And physical social activity. There's no physical activity nowadays with the children unless they go out themselves. We went on bikes, we used to ride on bikes, we played jacks, we played hopscotch, we knew how to skip. The children nowadays can't skip, they can't ride a bike. We've got cycling classes going on in my last school I worked in to help the children to ride a bike. It's not happening there. The connections are not being formed, are they? So obviously that's going to lead to dementia later on. Okay? So, I know I'm sounding like a moany old bag, but I'm a teacher. So that is what happens. Now, this is really worrying, but everywhere I've looked in my research, females have got a higher tendency of getting dementia. Okay? And that is just the way it is. But so, in a minute I will show you something which may contribute towards that. It's to do with having children. So that will be interesting. They take it all out of us. Vascular disorders, multiple strokes. We know stroke happens because of lack of oxygen to the brain. Yes? And a certain part of your brain dies, doesn't it, when you have a stroke? That's why you have the speech problem. Then anybody who's had multiple strokes, they are going to then suffer from dementia. Inherited disorders such as Huntington's, and infections such as HIV, big ones where you need heavy, high treatment, like the cancer treatments that you have, chemotherapy, which gets rid of all your nerves and all sorts. Okay? Some forms of dementia are treatable, so we're looking at the cures now. Treatable dementias, ones which happen because of chronic drug abuse. So when you take a lot of drugs, I have been on a drug course recently, and it was really, really sad with the amount of really high level drugs that are out there nowadays, which alter your brain structure. High, like cocaine and all of that, ecstasy. Ecstasy changes all the chemicals in your brain. So when your brain chemicals change and the structure changes, you're going to exhibit dementia type traits. But if it's done at a young age, while your brain is still developing, there is a way of changing that with medical treatment. So chronic drug abuse, all of these are treatable dementias. Normal pressure, hydrocephalus, which is to do with all the pressure in the brain that you can change. For example, blood thinners as well you can get. You know, when you're on a stroke and you have blood thinners, and that helps. Chronic subdural hematoma, benign brain tumours, vitamin deficiency, and hypothyroidism. All of those can be treated with medication. And by looking at the medical history, that also helps with the diagnosis process. So a physician will want to determine the onset of symptoms and how they've changed over time. So for example, you mentioned, Audrey, that your mum was always nervous and anxiety and, you know, was a bit anxious. And then when they're looking at anxious, they'll take that into consideration, that that was already there before she had the dementia. So they will look at, right down to childhood actually. You might have had banged your head and cracked it open as a child, you see. So every stage of your life is looked at. Determine risk factors for infection, family history of dementia or other neurological disease, alcohol and drug use, and a patient's history of strokes. All of those things are looked at. And then psychological examination takes place, evaluates a person's cognitive ability. You know that stuff you said about the cue, that was all to do with cognition. Orientation in time and space, that's again to do with the cue, 3D. Memory, language skills, reasoning, ability, attention and social appropriateness. All of that is looked at. Tests involve asking a person to repeat sentences, name objects. Someone with Alzheimer's is usually cooperative, attentive and appropriate but has poor memory. So they can also distinguish who's got Alzheimer's and who may have general dementia. Someone with hydrocephalus is likely to be distracted and less cooperative, for example. And dementia diagnosis, there is brain imaging and things that can help. CT scans are very good, MRI scans are very good because they show the structure of the brain. Also cerebrospinal fluid, which is again linked with your brain. Blood tests, especially with the diagnosis of neurosyphilis, can be used. But on the whole, blood tests can't be used, not for dementia. It's more imaging and things. Metabolic tests, though, can be done to determine treatable disorders such as vitamin B12 deficiency. And EEG is used specifically for a particular type of dementia, which is Creutzfeldt-Jakob, which is a different type of dementia. You can use an EEG to diagnose that. So once you give the diagnosis, what is the reaction of the families, do you think? Let's start with the white British English culture first. You take it on board, don't you? I know you two have taken it on board wonderfully, haven't you? I think you have.
My mum was diagnosed the same week I had a stroke.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a double whammy for the family, but we just got on with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now what happens in our culture goes, ignore it, they ignore it because it tells you already in our Quran that towards the end of life he returns to the same state of weakness with which he had started life in this world. So it's shrugged off. He started off weak in a pram, he ends up weak in a wheelchair. Yes? It already tells us that in some of our books. So it's shrugged off as in its old age. Its old age.
I think we have the opposite. I don't know how you feel, but my mum will be 87 next month.
Yes.
But we still treat her like she's 25.
Really, that's good.
No,
That's what you're
honestly.
supposed to do, isn't it?
You know, we
Yes.
don't see her as an old person.
Yes.
We
Yes.
still treat her.
Yes. Now we do as well, because it does tell us again and again, they looked after you when you were children and they were patient with you. Now you look after them when they are old. And it even says lower your wing of humility over them. Look after them. So it tells you that as well. Okay? There is a big stigma of dementia at the moment within the Asian community. If you look at back home in our home countries, the word dementia doesn't exist. Okay? Autism doesn't exist. These are new terms that have only come out here in the past 10 to 15 years. Think of mental health. There was a huge stigma of mental health here in this country going back 10 years. In this group, if I ever told any woman that this group is to help with mental health and anxiety, they wouldn't even come in here. In fact, someone I know said, I'm not going there because somebody's going to think I'm mentally ill. Okay? Now the stigma's gone. I very clearly tell people this group, yes, it is to help everybody. Mental health, anxiety, depression, anything, even good networks with your families and things, and your friends, to make friends or language skills, they happily come along. So the stigma has decreased in this country, but our home countries that are developing countries are that far back at the moment, another 10, 20 years back, I would say. It's going to take time. So a lot of immigrants who will come over will still have that mentality, and they will also think of the word dementia as mental illness. And there is a big stigma of mental illness now.
In those days, they used to say you were senile.
Senile, yeah. And that still exists back in our countries, the developing countries.
Can I ask, sorry?
Yes.
Here, I mean, I went to a care home yesterday in
Yes.
Brentwood actually,
Yes.
and there's lots of people in there. I think 80% had some form of dementia, and I was talking to them about it.
Yes.
But I didn't see any Asian ladies in there. I didn't
Yeah.
see any BAME.
There's a big reason.
Do you care for them yourself?
Yes,
Right.
there's a big, big thing there. It is in our faith, but also within our culture, that we have to look after our parents, and we get rewarded for it in our afterlife.
Right.
The reward, did you know, if looking after your mother is heaven? Do you know there's a saying in our faith, you might have heard of it, heaven lies at the feet of thy mother. So by looking after your mother is your route towards paradise. That's how big it is. So people take on that duty as much as they can. And a lot of our communities are still living in extended families with mother-in-laws and things. So it is possible as well. And it's actually looked down upon, putting them in an old people's home. Now again, think of the culture in this country. Look back to Victorian days. They were not old people's homes. There were granny annexes around the corner in the same house, and people looked after their grandparents, didn't they? And the family structure was strong and wonderful.
My grandmother moved in with us.
There you go. Classic example, yes? But then now, society has deteriorated a little bit, it has, hasn't it? And it is becoming like that in all the cultures. So now there are old people's homes, and people very quietly put their old people in a home. But what's sad is some of those old people only on Mother's Day will see their children and never any time with them. I have met an old lady, my heart went out to her. She said, I only see my son once a year on Mother's Day. They don't even come to even visit me. It's very sad. So, you know what? In our culture, it's actually expected that from the mothers that we will look after them. My mum is very ill at the moment, and me and my sister have been going every other day to look after her. And we sent carers round, and she sent them packing. She goes, I've got my 2 daughters to do it. Why do I need carers to do it? Yet she knows how busy I am, and she knows how busy my sister is. And my sister's not well either. But no. And then we found a private lady. We thought, okay, she might be better with a private lady. And I told my mum, this private lady's coming, which knows your friend. And I thought she'll come and she'll cook for her at least, because she is a one-way path where she only wants the Asian food. She don't want no fish and chips. She doesn't want no chicken and chips from the shop. She wants just her own Asian food. So I got this lady, and I thought we'll meet her tomorrow around my mum's house, and she can then sort out, make chapatis and things for her, you know, the things that I haven't got time to do. Well, she went and told me yesterday, get rid of that woman, I don't want her coming around my house. I've got you two to do it, you can make curry and bring it to me. So yesterday I had to ring up the poor lady and say, sorry, you can't come. So, you know, it's very, very difficult.
She don't want strangers.
She doesn't. She's not accepted yet that she's old. There's a big acceptance problem there. She doesn't wear her hearing aids either.
Yeah, my mum,
So-
that just reminds me of my mum, like a little while ago,
Yeah.
even like 2 years ago,
Yeah.
to even think of having someone coming to cook her a meal or
Yeah.
remind her of her meds because I was working was
Yeah.
out of the question.
Yeah.
She would tell them to go away.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with me, go away. my daughter's supporting me, you know, the same kind of thing, but now she's more accepting, so that there's a change.
And it took my mum a couple of falls before she then started using a walking stick. She goes, no, what is everyone else going to think about me?
We all have pride.
Yeah. So this is what it says also in the Quran. God is the one who created you from weakness, then made strength after weakness, then made weakness and grey hair after strength. It even mentions the grey hair as well. And it also tells you already, you know, it says that many people lose control of their bladder and bowels in dementia. It actually tells you that in our books. So it says, if we grant long life to any, we cause him to be reversed in nature. Okay? Then it says, reverse him in nature means in old age, God turns him back to the state of childhood. He becomes unable to stand and walk without the help and support of others. He is fed by others. He urinates and defecates in bed, talks childishly, and is laughed at by others. It actually tells you that in our books. So when you tell an Asian person, your mum's got dementia or your dad's got dementia, they'll say, well, it's fine, it's part of normal life, because it tells you that in our books. But this is just for you, some of you who work in organisations, to understand a black and Asian point of view, really. Now the other one, you know, I mentioned that women have Alzheimer's more and dementia more. Well, there's something else. Some people have done some research, and it says, why does your mother feel pain in her knees, teeth and joints? Did you know that God has placed babies in the womb of women in a very salty juice, deliberately to lighten the weight, and at the same time for food to come without fatigue through the cord associated with mother, to provide the baby with the food it needs. If the mother does not eat food, the child will not miss anything, because some glands reach to melt the teeth and bones of the mother to replace the missing food. So did you know, therefore, upon reaching old age, the mother's teeth and knees and joints are more in pain because of that, because of their pregnancies. This makes many people say that women grow old before a man. There you go. This is the latest research. If a man knew that he has melted his mother's bone to live, he would not know how to reward her. So isn't that amazing, that bit about the salty fluid around the baby is really salty, and when the baby, and that actually has an influence on the bones of a mother, which is why they do become more weaker. When I look at my mum and dad, that is the case, because my dad is still able to walk and stuff, but my mum's totally gone.
Sorry, Sidra, I have a question to ask, sorry.
Yes.
So this is about the women who did produce children. What about the ones who were infertile? All their life they could not produce children, but they still end up having all those symptoms.
Yeah, well basically, this is a research that has been done basically to compare both, and they've found with women who have had children, this is more prominent.
All right.
Yes, because of the salty fluid.
Can I?
Yes.
Hasn't it also got anything to do with the fact that, you know, some women have postnatal depression?
Yes. Hormonal, yes.
That is it. Couldn't it be related to the, maybe something in the brain or?
It could be related to that, yes, because hormone imbalance also leads to depression and things as well.
Okay.
That actually we did cover a little bit at another talk.
Okay.
The hormonal imbalance, for example, I think we mentioned it in the stress and food talk, didn't we, when we said about the antibiotics and things. The hormonal imbalance can lead to that. And you know, some of the antibiotics that are, for example, in food, in meat, especially, you know, all the factory farming methods that are being used nowadays, and artificial hormones and antibiotics are being pumped into meat,
chicken,
especially chicken, all that's going inside us. It is then imbalancing our normal, natural brain chemicals, and because of that there's more mental health problems out there. So it is linked. Mental health is definitely 100% linked with hormonal imbalance and chemicals in the brain. And antibiotics in the animals, did you know, are the same antibiotics as we need. So there's antibiotic resistance going on. So every time we go to doctors and we take an antibiotic, it doesn't work because we are becoming resistant to antibiotics. That's actually a well-known fact. So it's all in the animals, meat especially. But a lot of people say you're safe with vegetables. All those antibiotics from the animals' manure and stuff's all going in the soil, and then it's all going into the vegetables. And all that crossbreeding of vegetables to make new vegetables, or artificially colouring them, that's having a big impact on the brains. All the artificial food, the processed food, it's not natural food. They say that processed sugar actually starts cancer off. There's things like that going on, isn't there, research? Because your natural system is not there to readily accept it all. You know, that kind of stuff, which is all artificial. Okay, this is the Asian community. They will think dementia as mental health and as madness. They won't tell anybody. I actually did have an aunt who had dementia and nobody knew. It was hidden and swept under the carpet because it affects the reputation in the wider family and community. The wider family and community is wide, believe me, in the Asian community, because we all live together still with mother-in-laws and father-in-laws and mothers and fathers and, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's a perceived shame and stigma, so it's hidden under the carpet. And some people may even look at dementia as genetic, which it is, some bits are, aren't they? And that will actually spoil the future of children's marriages. So again, this is coming back from our communities in our own home countries. You need money to marry off children, and who's going to marry a child if they know the granddad's got dementia? That child might get dementia when they're older. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? So it happens all in the villages and the tribes and stuff. So perception of lack of marriage proposals for younger family members if they find out there's dementia in that family. This is the same, by the way, as British culture, like for example autism. Good 10, 20 years ago, nobody told anybody.
Yeah.
Because it will have an impact on the whole family, and it's genetic. Autism is quite a lot of genetic trends, and then who's autistic, the mum or the dad? People are going to start thinking. Okay, so all of these is basically a collective values, really, and this is actually something the NHS has actually recognised.
Well, in days gone by, they used to hide them in the attic.
Did they? That's not good. Yeah, in the olden days, they probably were put in
They
hospital.
thought it was mad, and they hid them away in the attic.
Yeah. So basically, with a Asian person or from anybody from the BAME community, they are more likely to go towards faith to help with dementia rather than going hospital and getting the other kind of support. That is a major difference. A lot of people from the BAME community are into their religion and they are into faith, luckily at the moment anyway. So they use that to help them, okay? These are some of the interventions. We're going to look at all of those. So medications we already spoke about. Aricept and Cognex are commercial names. Both increase acetylcholine in the brain by inhibiting the enzyme that breaks it down. So that is, you know when the chemicals change and you get dementia, this is actually a drug which is out, which actually helps to increase that again. And therapy, which is normal counselling and things that can help with the depression that often accompanies diagnosis, and counselling is also offered for families. Okay? Now, if we look at the faith side, which is someone more likely from the BAME community will go, did you know that meditation and prayer actually slows down the aging process? Okay? So I'm going to put that on now, a video. And when you watch that, it explains about all those 4 lobes in your brain, what happens when you meditate, or any type of contemplation. It doesn't have to be Buddhist meditation or Islamic prayer. It can be just quietly sitting down, relaxing. Mindfulness. Now this will come into music therapies, or did you know that there are certain sound waves, particular types of sound waves, which actually activate regions in your brain which are linked with learning, memory, attention and planning. So a lot of these things are, you know, for example, scriptural readings, which are the original words of God, like the Quran, and also other things like Buddhists have got journals out. When you read the original Buddhist words, there's a certain sound wave in those words which elevate God, and what they do is those sound waves are proven. They make the water cells in your body whole. So if you look at water cells under a microscope, they're all irregular, and the sound waves that are coming from some of these words energizes the water cells and they become whole. So what then happens is your brain expands again. So all the water in your brain expands. It's absolutely amazing. And the corpus callosum, you know, the corpus callosum goes smaller when you've got dementia. Well, when you say these words, the water cells become whole and round, and the whole corpus callosum increases in size, which increases in the cortisol availability of substances needed to repair damaged tissues. Dopamine also accelerates, which helps with pleasure, courage, joy and motivation, which is really, really interesting. This is any form of meditation. All of that helps with increasing your brain. There is actually a scientist called Moti. He's actually on YouTube, and he's a Japanese scientist, and he did this research of what happens when you say scriptural readings on top of water molecules. It makes them round. So that is something really, really interesting for you all.
Science has now revealed new secrets about water and the way water is influenced by the verses of the Quran. It has now been scientifically proven that water is affected by what is recited over it. Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto first began experimenting on water. Masaru Emoto said, "My Muslim colleague offered to play Quranic verses over the water. He bought a tape recorder and played some Quranic verses, and we got the most perfectly shaped crystals, subhanallah. These are actual images of the crystals that were formed after the verses of the Quran were played." Dr. Emoto was also told that Muslims recite Bismillah, which means in the name of God, before drinking water. This has been practiced by Muslims since the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The word Bismillah was found to improve the quality and the structure of even regular water. Alhamdulillah. Dr. Emoto completed these experiments, which lasted 15 years. He published a 5-volume book called Messages from Water. He wrote, "I have proven that water is capable of thinking, fathoming, feeling, and expressing itself."
And did you know that music therapy and art therapy works in the same way as meditation? So music therapy is certain sound waves in relaxing music helps to make your corpus callosum bigger, increase. Some actually scriptural readings are in verse, you know, like if you look at the Quran, it's all rhyming, it's like a song to begin with. So it helps stimulate all those regions of the brain. And art therapy, did you know that while you're quietly down there concentrating, it has the same effect as meditation, where you're closing certain parts of your brain, yeah? And what happens then is your brain is, stops the aging process. It's really amazing. So art therapy is out there. We've got a lovely lady here who's going to do art therapy with us today.
Got some help as well.
Have you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I've got some chocolates for you all. So do you want someone, if you want to come to the front and get those?
Oh no, why? We can share. We can share.
But you, I think these are for you because you're actually doing the art completely free today, and normally it costs us £150. Can we give her a clap? Because she was very happy to get all those bits with us. Did that at a right time for me because I'm busy with my mum at the moment, so it really, really helped me you doing that. So thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to doing origami later with all those lovely flowers.
Talking about that,
yes.
Can you say that if you have a positive thinking always, you know, you are positive about things,
that helps.
You encourage yourself, it also helps with that.
Did you know oxytocin gets released when you are positive about things and you're happy? The caring hormone. Did you know when you go out and you do voluntary work,
yeah,
and you help the homeless,
the happiness that comes out of helping someone
goes inside
you. It
Yes.
really makes you.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way to describe
Yes.
it. Yeah.
So oxytocin, when it increases in your body, it makes you happy, and it's the caring, the love hormone, which is released when you hug your child. Mothers, when they hug their children, when they breastfeed them, oxytocin is released. And it's the same impact when you go out and you do voluntary work. So get them involved in the churches and get them to start baking cakes and do voluntary work. It will help them. All of that helps. Exercise only if you are able to do it, relaxing techniques. Also, like I said, increase and maintaining social relationships like going to the church and helping out. All of that can help maintain cognitive and effective functioning. And then the other one, in some prayer rituals, for example yoga or with Islamic prayer, there are certain positions of prayer. And did you know that when, for example, you're up and you go down, all of that difference helps with your breathing. And what does that do? You're inhaling more oxygen. You know when you're anxious and you have to calm down and people tell you, take a deep breath, breathe it all in. So difference in breathing is very, very good for you, and when you go, for example, from this position to this position, then up again, it increases your exhalation because, and basically during bowing and prostrating, you're activating your heart and lungs and you're sending more oxygen to the brain. Now if we look at Alzheimer's results as a decrease of blood flow to your brain and a decrease of oxygen to your brain. So these kinds of exercises can help. It doesn't have to be prayer, but it can be other types of exercises where you're inhaling more oxygen. And did you know the rise and fall of pressure actually makes your arteries flexible as well, especially when it's involving your head. So there, he's going down there and then up again. The pressure, the rise and fall of that pressure is actually making your arteries more flexible in your brain. Good, isn't it? It's exercise of your brain. And the best position, did you know, for Alzheimer's is actually that position, a position of complete prostration, which we do in the Islamic prayer. The best position is the prostration where more blood is forced to enter the blood vessels of the head due to gravity in the ground. And that minimizes the risk of diseases caused by lack of blood to the brain like Alzheimer's. So it is very, very interesting.
As a child pose too.
It is the child pose,
in
yes.
yoga.
Yes, yes. So, like I said, it doesn't have to be the Islamic prayer, it can be just doing these postures. It increases the blood flow to the brain. Okay, so that brings me to the end of that. We've looked at everything basically, the science side, the causes, the culture and the cure. So we'll finish off now with questions if there are any. I think a lot of you are wonderful today. You kept the ball rolling with questions as we went along. But are there any questions?
Well, you said it affects women more than men. Where are you looking at perhaps statistics? Is that just generally because women live longer than men?
Yes, that is actually a very, very good point. Women do live longer than men. That's a proven fact. Did you know why?
They can't find things because they're only looking at
So they fall into their grave. We have a lot more hormones in us, and the hormones that we have in our bodies make our hearts stronger. So that's why women live longer than men. So that's the reason. So our hormones are good as well.
Wow.
As well as bad, and the grief they cause us, it's a good thing as well. It compensates. And that is actually a brilliant point, what you've just brought up. Because they live longer, they could be getting, obviously they're going to get dementia as they get older anyway. Now that's a classic one, because that hasn't been said by anybody really in the past, in any of the courses I've gone to. That is probably the reason. You've got that right spot on, well done.
we kill them off because they can't find things.
Yeah, a lot of people like that one, don't they, about the tunnel vision, and it is true.
You can't find it.
The same person, the same cupboard, you send a man and they can't see it because they only see in front. And then we go and then we find it, oh here it is.
I never knew about the tunnel vision. That's really
Do you know why
It
they've got
explains a
tunnel
lot, doesn't
vision? If you look at going back to Stone Age, why did they need tunnel vision? To aim animals and things, you know, for food, didn't they? Yeah, it is amazing.
But my mum can see the two shelves in the fridge, but some days she can't see the salad tray. So she'll ring up, she'll go, I need salad. I go, Mum, there was salad in there this morning. There's not salad in my fridge. And she's not looking in any other drawer apart from them two shelves.
Yeah.
Oh God, that happens to me.
It does
My
to me.
sisters would say these are two decoration pieces. Like they would say there is a cup on the table. I said, no, there is no cup in the table. And they say, those decoration pieces.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
So, someone who has high blood pressure,
Yes.
can they get dementia?
Yes, I did mention the hypertension in the nerves increases it because more nerve cells are going to die. But with that kind of problem, medication can help. So for example, for blood pressure and things, we've got medication, haven't we? Yeah. But that, if it's prolonged, untreated, yes, it can lead to dementia. Yes, definitely.
I just want to, yeah, you go.
You said you might not relate this topic, but
Yes.
I just needed to know because as a busy mom, I'm quite busy. I forget sometimes appointments. I have too much on my plate.
Yes.
You can relate this to future dementia or anything? You know, even I write it down in calendar.
Writing on the calendar is fine. I'm talking about generally everything goes into phones nowadays instead of writing it down. Writing on the calendar is
I'm
okay.
saying I forget things too. You know,
You forget things still.
You know, I think she can't hear. What she means is,
You know what, with
she
you, it's a
gets
different,
dementia.
you've got 5 children, haven't you? So that takes a lot out of us. There's a lot more to remember there, isn't there? We've just got 5 children. So it's a bit different.
So she hasn't got it.
No, you haven't, you're fine, honestly.
Yes.
You still recognise me, don't you? So it's all
Don't
right.
worry, you haven't got it, yes.
Yeah. I don't think anybody here needs to get worried yet.
But how about my dementia symptoms in my menopause? Does that mean it
That's
come back?
normal. That's normal, by the way. Yes, yes. Do you know those dementia type symptoms come because of the fluctuating of hormones?
Yeah.
And you know what, even when I'm on my monthly, I forget things. I'll tell you something really interesting. My daughter was revising for her GCSEs and she was getting all A stars in her exam papers that my husband was setting her. And then she came on a period and all of a sudden her levels went down on her exams to 50%.
Oh.
And she couldn't remember anything anymore. And then my husband said it's because she's on her monthly. Because you know, when your hormones are all over the place, you just forget.
So those poor students that sit their exams, and it's not how unfortunate for them.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
completely the wrong
has a
person, isn't it?
huge impact. And you know, when you're on your monthly, when you're on your menopause and all that stuff, you get more anxious as well.
Oh,
You're more anxious. You're more forgetful. You get angry. You can't control your feelings. You lash out. You lash out.
So it's all to do with things
all to
going
do
on,
with
the
your
chemicals and the hormones.
Yeah, it's all to do with that, definitely.
I haven't got a question, but I've got information really.
Yes.
That in Basildon, in a place called Timberlog Lane, I don't know if
I saw it, yeah.
there's a place.
Yes, a new place.
Peaceful place.
Yes.
I used to be in Southend and I visited them there many years ago, but they're now in Basildon. The Peaceful Place, run by a lovely lady, I think her name's Caroline Girard, and it's for people who have early onset dementia, so young people, where the carers can have a break, you know, so people go there, I believe, for the day. It's like a day centre. But you wouldn't believe it, would you? You know, that we need places like that. It's advertised on the community tree. I've got the little adverts for community. I'm always plugging my community tree.
That's brilliant. Could we send those round?
Pass
please?
them round.
Thank you so much for bringing those.
This directs you to the mental health support service as a community tree.
Yes, that's very interesting.
Thank you.
The other thing is, you know, with a male brain, they have boxes. Yeah, they have a box for this and a box for work and a box for homes and a box for sex and things like that. Whereas women, we're multitasking.
Yes.
So we have nerves going in and out of all those boxes, mainly because of the children, so we can multitask with the children. What happens is, as women get older and they start to get dementia, they end up with boxes as well, because all the nerves going in and out of the boxes, they actually then go. Yeah? So then we end up not being able to think outside the box like men, basically. So very interesting.
Yeah. It is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why they say men love with their mind and we love with our hearts.
Now the other thing is, did you know that when we had our audiologist who came here and gave a talk, she said that if you are old and you do not wear your hearing aids, those hearing pathways will shut down and then you get dementia. It leads more to dementia.
Oh.
Because you know the hearing, when you hear, it involves a certain pathway, doesn't it? And that pathway then goes when you're not using it. If you don't use it, you lose it. Yeah? If you don't use it, you lose it. And this is the same with children. If they don't use social skills, they will lose that pathway. Do you understand? So that's a really interesting point to make there.
Can I just say, everybody, a big thank you to Sidra. That's a hell of a lot of work you've put together to do that, and it's been so very, very interesting. Can we give her a big...
Right, I think we'll stop there on that note, and then we'll find out what's happening with food, which I knew would be late because it's only 2 minutes.
No, don't say that.